Horror. Horror over the years has been talked about for so many reasons. The tension, the cinematography, the plot. But something I don't see discussed about enough is the importance of place when discussing horror as a genre. The atmosphere can add so much to how horror can make someone feel, whether it's lulling you into a false sense of security or leaving you in the silent dread of what will happen next. The setting creates the backdrop that can both immerse the audience of the story as well as amplifying the desired emotions out of the viewer and influencing the characters. I personally love getting invested in watching a character grapple with their situation over time and see how they can grow as people and as characters through their setting. Today I wanted to go in depth with 3 different stories and how they're able to use their setting to drive their themes and dictate how they can influence both the characters in the story and the average viewer. Part 1. A Raisin in the Sun. While the majority of this video is about horror, I want to start going over a non-horror related example, in order to get a more general sense of what I'm talking about. First is a short story turned play called A Raisin in the Sun. It's a relatively quick little story about an African-American family in the late 1950s. To sum it up short, the family gets a large inheritance check from the passing of a family member, and they try to escape their crusty, musty apartment to try to pursue a better life. What I like a lot about this setup is how it functions as a way to look into the perspectives of each member of the family. We have Benithia, who desperately wants to go live to Africa, returning to her roots and seeking freedom from the, at the time, modern problems of the modern world, like finding jobs, making ends meet, and taxes. Walter, no not that Walter, who falls victim to impulses extremely easily and tends to be a horrible role model for their kid, but still wants the best for their family with big aspirations of making it big. We have his wife, Ruth, who just wants a stable life for their family and mostly serves as a stereotypical 50s invisible housewife, but tends to be the straight man for Walter, trying to be more calm and less broad and more grounded in what they're comfortable with and staying where they are. And then we have Mama, probably the best character in the story. All she really wants is for her family to be happy and healthy and is willing to make change for that sake while also being responsible. She also tends to be the most logical and reasonable member of the family, which probably plays into why she's my favorite character. But yeah, all these characters have their own setup and motivation, which goes to what they think is best for the family, and I personally think is a really excellent way to flesh out your characters, especially for such a short plot. You can see how the 4 characters feel about where they live and what they want to do about it, while also getting a look into how their living situation, being a dingy Chicago apartment in the 50s, affects the desperation and motivation of each character. But enough talk about what this can do, it's time to actually get into it. Their living situation is, for lack of a better word, bad. With the combined power of 3 working adults, the most they could afford as African Americans in the 50s is a dirty, cockroach-infested apartment with not enough space required for 5 people to live there. Needless to say, no one would ever want to live there. Honestly, if I did, I'd simply just die on the spot, dead, gone. As a result, each character wants to leave this awful place in favor of somewhere else. Neither wants to live in a free modern-day life, due to the suffering in it for so long, and she has this grand sense of escapism in leaving the capitalistic system of the US to go back to her roots, working as a villager with no taxes, bad apartments, and the normal struggles related to living in the US. She believes she can just leave with her husband and go off to live a perfect life in comparison to how she's been raised, in a place where she's not respected, seen as equal, or loved as a member of her family. And she believes that leaving to Africa can change all of that for the better, removing her problems with the modern-day America, and without entirely knowing what she's signing up for by leaving. Walter is tired of being viewed as a lower citizen, but he doesn't believe in putting in the hard hours of work, considering that all of his life he's put in effort into having a sustainable job and income, only for it to lead him nowhere. The setting left him under the impression that he was getting lucky with a gamble is genuinely its best with him for his family. Part 2. The Haunting of Hill House. The Haunting of Hill House is a book about, well, Hill House. A probably definitely 100% haunted house where the main character, Eleanor, bonds with a couple of other guests in the house and eventually goes insane. Throughout the book, Eleanor is established as a person without much of a life. She didn't have a home, she didn't have many friends, and when she got an invitation to stay at Hill House, it seemed like her one ticket to changing that. She meets all the other main guests, Dr. Montague, Theodora, and Luke. Over the course of the story, she gets more and more attached to each character, especially Theodora, to the point where she has full faith in either living in the house or living with Theodora. She's desperate and is willing to do anything to keep these connections that she's wanted for so long. Part of why she gets to this point is because of how isolated Hill House is. Everyone in it is left to be with themselves, and not anyone else is really there with them. The isolation behind being in this closed-off space creates this idea in Eleanor's head that this is all she has, to the point where any reality outside of Hill House might as well not exist. At a time where she starts to deal with the paranormal elements of the house, which, combined with the already established isolation, only leaves Eleanor in a poor mental space. Voices start calling to her in the middle of the night. A giant message telling her that she should leave is written with what's probably blood on the wall. She's panicking. She feels so alone, and the house itself, encouraging her to abandon the little she has left, breaks her. So much to the point where the climax centers around having her blow out after hearing how much people don't really care for her. Theodora even tells her, "Do you often want to be where you aren't wanted?" Absolutely breaking Eleanor to bits. She's stuck in this mindset where this isolated house is all she has, and this setting paints a picture of a smaller world she's actively losing, which brings her to a breaking point. She runs around the house, eventually getting to a ledge outside the house where she could very easily kill herself. She's lost. She doesn't know why she's doing this. I personally believe that internally she just wanted to end her life because she believed she had nothing and could never get anything. This was all she had, and this is all she could ever get. The house changed her to be hopeless, lost, and fully believing there's nothing outside of the house for her. This is all she has. Even when this is resolved in the final moments of the book, after saying her goodbyes to the other guests, she takes her own life immediately, just gone. The setting adds so much to the setup and eventual downward spiral, as without it, there would have been hope for Eleanor. If the single house didn't affect her so much, she could have had the chance to meet new people, find new opportunities, and get back on her feet. But no, the house changed her to such an extreme degree that she is nothing other than the house. She's so sucked into it that dying is better than leaving it. For my final story, When You Hear the Locusts Sing. Final story I want to discuss with you about is a short horror story called When You Hear the Locusts Sing. It's about a kid who turns into a human-sized locust and deals with the reactions towards their family. The animalistic impulses of being a bug and watching how everyone views them. The kid, Francis, takes this shocking transformation in odd direction. He's happy and reflects on how miserable his home is, his school is, and his own family. He, in the story, willingly kills his father and mother for food with little if any grief, and then goes to a school where he undecidedly killed several students. But how did he get to this point? I believe it's because of how both his home life and at school, he's had it rough, to the point where his environment was extremely awful at all times, with a family that, according to his words, despised him anyway, with his only escape being a school where he was constantly isolated and harassed by everyone, not having a single friend. The setting of this story raised him to be apathetic, because he was under the notion that no one really cared about him, and this most likely led to a blatant lack of empathy towards anyone else. Everyone rejected him and acted selfish and horrible, so why shouldn't he? The way someone is raised and the environment they're raised in can determine everything about a person, and in this case, that can even lead to a blatant, apathetic murder of one's own kin, student, and family alike. It's a major breakdown and critique of how people can be left astray by society as a whole and are left to stir in their mentally unwell thoughts, which can lead to a boiling point of severe harm. Similar to Eleanor, Francis had potential. He could have been a good and happy kid, not turned into this large bug. If it weren't for terrible parents in a terrible living situation with terrible students that appear to live to torment Francis alone, his setting, his place, dictated the future of apathetic slaughter. Seeing other lives is nothing more than a way to stay alive. Part 4. Conclusions. All these stories have one major underlying theme of how someone's setting can change them. It influences their mental state, their emotions, their motivations, and how they view the world as a whole. And this influence is not only the main driving force behind the conflicts of each of these stories, but it's also why these stories are powerful, because they have their hooks in real life. All these characters are fictional, but they have a strong attachment to our own world to the point where we can learn from their experiences. We can see how all these characters that were influenced by place and setting have we can see, and that influence is a part of ourselves to the point where we could be whole separate people with entirely different personalities and perspectives if we were raised somewhere else or lived somewhere else or were separated from our current life. And that influence is a part of ourselves to the point where we could be whole separate people with entirely different personalities and perspectives if we were raised somewhere else or lived somewhere else or were separated from our current life. Place equals personality. In conclusion, places affect people to a major degree, and it's worth taking that into consideration with both understanding fiction, reality, and how that can go into your opinions on horror and your opinions on reality. Thank you so much for getting to the end of this video. This took a very long time to make, and I really appreciate sticking through to the very end. Yeah, bye.